Welcome to the continuation of the LEAD Marketing Conference with its focus on loyalty, engagement, analytics, and digital applications. I'm your host, John Karolewski. Thank you for joining us. Our next presentation deals with product sampling and will discuss digital disruption, data, and consumer desire, as well as best practices for the best results. Now, this session is interactive. If you have questions, type them in the chat box in the lower left of your screen. We'll answer them along the way and at the end as time allows. And finally, at the end of the program, there will be a one-question quiz for valuable prizes. The question will be based on this presentation, so please pay attention. Joining me now is Larry Burns, President and CEO of Start Sampling. Take it away, Larry.
Thanks, John, and thanks to those of you out there in webinar land giving a listen. As John said, one of the things I'm going to talk about is digital disruption, data, and consumer desire, and talk about best practices. My bias is a sampling perspective, but many of the best practices we'll be talking about apply regardless of tactic in terms of how one deals with data in this new world. So when we think about, hang on just a second here, when we think about what I'm trying to get at today, we're going to talk a little bit about Start Sampling just so you understand my bias, and then spend some time talking about what's happening in the world. Some of this will be familiar to many of you. You've seen charts, you've seen evidence, you've heard about the vast amount of data that's being produced and the kinds of disruptions that are going on. I like to set the stage for that. Then we'll talk a little bit about what that's done to consumer behavior, particularly in the digital world. And then get into best practices. Again, it's around product sampling, but it has applications across well beyond just sampling. This one page for me, it's kind of the bias that I bring to the table. I run a company called Start Sampling. We work in the CPG space, so the vast majority of my commentary will be concerning consumer packaged goods. And we have a program that has been around since 1999, so a lot of people look at my white hair and say, you're a digital pioneer, and it's true. We've been around for quite some time and have seen a lot of changes in the world and in the market, and a huge amount of change when it comes to data. So back in way long ago in 2001, this was the academic debate. How are we going to control data volume, velocity, and variety? Because everybody was very concerned, given those current business conditions, that the existing models for traditional data management have already been pushed to their limits. This is 2001. And all kinds of new approaches were happening. Okay, let's move 9 years forward to 2010, when in fact Eric Schmidt made this comment, which was, there was 5 exabytes of data and information created between the dawn of civilization through 2003, and now that much information is being created every 2 days. A lot of people took exception with that comment and said, well, the math wasn't completely right. But when you look back at all of the blog posts and everything surrounding it, this was a true statement based on everything I've seen out there. When we think about it, if you look at 2002, there was about 23 exabytes. By the way, that's 10 to the 18th for those of you who are keeping track mathematically. It's 10 to the 18th, so it's 18 zeros. 23 exabytes of information was recorded and replicated in 2002, and now we record and transfer that much information every 7 days. So when you talk about the scale of this and the amount of data, it truly is bordering on incomprehensible. And when you actually look at it, it's not just the size of the data, it's also the ever-increasing speed with which this information is being collected. Interesting on this chart, 75% of all the digital data that is being created and managed and housed and transferred is created by humans themselves. We, the consumers, are ones who are creating all this by the digital trails that we leave as we execute things. Every time we do execute something in the marketplace, it's being captured, it's being read, it's being stored. Not terribly much used in the past because it was so large we were trying to figure out how to use it. Interesting stats up there, 154 billion emails a day. It's incredible the volume of information that has been going on, and this is the 2010 chart. Now, just for frame of reference and context and history, that little red arrow there, if anyone, and we're not going to stop and do an actual quiz, but think about what that might be, and I'll tell you what it is. When you actually look back in history, June 27th, or 29th, I can't remember which, late June of 2007, that is the first time the iPhone was introduced, the iPhone 1. So you can see that what has happened to us as marketers, if you will, is that that new platform has created enormous, the smartphone platform, enormous change in the amount of data and information. It's also done a lot to change the way in which human beings interact with us in the marketing world. Right? We talked about it as the path to purchase. That's the way we've been talking about it for a very long time. Now when you start thinking about it, the Gartner quote is, I think, really interesting, that the CMO is going to be spending more on information technology than the CIO by 2017. Frankly, it may be faster than that. And why? It's because people and how we influence them has changed so dramatically with this digitally disruptive data that's just now part of our life. Right? You remember back in the days, late 90s, all those years ago, mid-90s actually, when AG, Lafayette P&G, came out and we were talking about this notion of path to purchase. Right? I run the advertising, they go to shelf, that's the first moment of truth. They take it home, try it at the second moment of truth, and now you all know about the zero moment of truth and what Google has been talking about. When people engage with the content that we as marketers create, they engage with it in all different sorts of ways. I like the conversation about a purchase pretzel because we go back and forth down this path to purchase. There's nothing linear about it. We check in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of places, on all kinds of devices, to understand what's happening in the market, to see what other people are saying. And all this information is leaving trails. And we can begin to use that to be more intelligent about how we think about and reach the consumers that are out there that we're trying to influence to try and use the brands that we market. And it's also interesting in terms of the media and the capabilities that are now coming to bear. When you think about it, this is just a simple chart talking about video. When you think about it, you now have the ability, and here in the United States we're doing it with Comcast 360 and DirecTV. They are beginning to be able to, at small scale right now in test markets, traffic video and advertisements differentially based on the knowledge, the consumer knowledge about the household within which that cable box or DirecTV box resides. Right? We've always done this in the old behavior scan test markets back in history, where we've done A/B testing of videos to see which commercial was going to perform better. But now we're actually right on the cusp of being able to execute that kind of activity at scale. Right at the same time, a huge number of people are not using the television and the cable box as their primary means of interacting with video, because now you've got the Hulus of the world and all the other things you see there. So this big data has been here. We've been growing towards using it in interesting and new and different ways. And even as we're finally getting to the point of executing at scale, consumers have yet again moved in a different direction. Another quote that came out recently from Melissa Parrish at Forrester, she was talking about where we are in terms of using big data. By the way, I hate the term big data. I just use it because it's an industry standard term. But the whole idea here is she was really predicting at tail end of 13 that we would, as marketers, really start to put to use and stop waiting the information that's contained within all this information. The thing that I like about the quote is it's talking about breaking down the marketing ecosystem as it now exists, breaking down the silos that exist, separating interactive from traditional marketing vehicles. But I think it even goes further than that, because it's breaking down everything into the perspective of I can begin to understand at an individual or household level behaviors in ways that I could not before, that isn't just reported data or inferred data based on census information or all the things that exist in many of the databases that are out there. You're actually being able to track and store and understand an individual's actual behavior. What that's now done is it's created for us in the digital marketing world. As I said, I've been out here doing this for more than 10 years now. But I like the guys at Adobe who have created, by the way, well stolen is half done. That's why you're seeing a lot of other people's material in the presentation I do. Because this is something that I really like. This is from the folks at Adobe. chiefmartech.com. They write a lot about what's going on and what's happening in the industry. this is the challenge that the marketing groups face today. This is their reality. There's so many options and so many opportunities and so much data that we're in that world of chaos when you've got this kind of a seismic change. We've seen changes before. When scanner data came in, I'm old enough to remember that, and SAMI went away, for those of you who are that old, it was a sea change. It took many years to adapt to that sea change. The changing sea, it's changing with the tide these days. It's coming in and out so fast, it's almost impossible for us to adapt to something new before the next thing is coming and the next thing is coming. So, a lot of folks are reacting to this with a lot of test and learn methodology and a lot of attempts and trying to figure out what to do. And I see a lot of the folks in the consumer packaged goods world behaving in a very, I think, intelligent manner, which is they're testing, they're playing, they're learning, they're exploring, and when they find something that they think works, they're actually then sitting down and trying to work with generally the entrepreneur who's created this and help them scale, because it's very difficult for all these companies to scale. That takes a lot of time, energy, and expense, and we see some of the CPG folks actually specifically seeking out, it's not picking winners and losers, it's saying this particular piece of technology will really help me, and I want to help that company get it to scale so I can use it. So this is what's going on in the marketing world. And by the way, don't forget, in terms of the data and disruption and everything that's happening, it's not limited to marketing data. It's not limited to what you're doing online and how that's tracked, or how you're engaging at stores, or where you're checking in on Foursquare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You also have this rather remarkable explosion in the Internet of Things, things which have sensing devices to them, which create a data stream. Very easy to think about that if you know about Fitbit. Right? Fitbit is a device that you wear that tracks all kinds of physical information and pedometer and changes and things, and it has an opportunity to transmit that. So you're starting to see this object augmentation beginning to happen. You're also starting to see very interesting things going on in like room and facility augmentation. Those of us in the States, we've seen the Comcast and other commercials where the son meets up with the parent up in the country somewhere and says he stopped by the house, and the guy takes out his cell phone, shuts off the water, closes the garage door, turns off the lights from a phone miles and miles away. This is that notion of sensing and remote augmentation that's not science fiction in any way, shape, or form. It's here today. It's just its adoption curve is going to be whatever it is, but that's also creating data streams. And how we might use those data streams from a marketing perspective. How you use the data streams in technology, in the supply chain, stunning. Used to be very difficult to understand whether or not a particular item was in stock at a particular store. Not so much anymore. Still not precise, still not 100% correct. But consumer expectations are that it will be correct. And so the discipline of using the information, the technology in the supply chain is becoming much more relevant and prevalent. And then last, I don't know, those of you might be familiar with a company called a group called Singularity U. Don't chuckle, it's not new age. It's the folks who are behind X Prize, and they've got a very interesting perspective on how to work with executives and work with company leaders to handle what really is, in all effects, an exponential change. I was at a presentation the gentleman delivered at NACDS a couple of weeks back, and he just showed the Google auto-drive car. Right? He actually showed a very funny video clip of people sitting in it and freaking out as it makes these rapid turns and it kind of scares them who's driving. But what was fascinating about it is the car was actually acting as a huge sensory net. It had multiple pieces of data that were being tracked all over the place. And it was generating huge amounts of data and volume and information in order to accomplish the task of driving. But those kinds of things, all the information that's being available to you, those of you who use toll tags, all that information is out there. Those of you who use Metro cards in your transportation life, all that information is creating a lot of information and data about behavior, which of course makes everybody get very nervous when it comes to the wonderful world of privacy. It remains a major issue out there in the world today. Mostly in my view because it's somewhat misunderstood and it's very easy to create an element of fear about this. And there are, of course, evil actors that can take advantage of this. We know about breaches in data and we know about identity theft, so you have to be intelligent. But for those of us in the marketing space, you need to be very smart about how you're going to use the data, and you need to be very transparent with the people whose data you are using who have opted in to allow you to work with them, because you can provide enormous value to a person by helping them accomplish their task based on having some insight into what that task might be, understanding their behavior, and having access to enormous volumes of data. But this whole thing is long-term, not settled yet. In the EU, fundamentally stricter provisions on data usage than here in the States, and it's going to seek its own level and eventually sort itself out. The problem with it in terms of the fear factor is the bumper sticker and the 30-second soundbite for the potential evil is so much more ratings-driven in terms of news channels, et cetera, than the reality, which is kind of a dull, bland, boring discussion of bits and bytes. One must be cautious, but you've got to take advantage of the data. And why am I ranting and raving about the data and all this stuff is because it's really all about, in this new world, what do people want? Right? That was the consumer desire piece of this. What do people want? Rashad wrote a quote, I don't even remember if he remembers writing it, probably 6 years ago or so at this point, which I love and I think is still very, very true. It's not content that's rare. It's even not compelling content that's rare. It's time that is rare. So what do consumers desire? Help me get my stuff done faster, easier, solution-based. Help me get to where I want to go quicker. Help me find my way to the item I want to buy. Make it easy for me. Deliver it to me tomorrow. All the things that are happening in the e-commerce world, it's the winners, I think, are the folks that are going to help human beings discover the content that they seek in the easiest, most frictionless way going forward. What does this all have to do with sampling? Why did I do the setup here? Well, the reality is, in my world of sampling, this is one of those moments and one of those places and one of those times where a human being has an opportunity to be who they are, which is a curious animal, interested in discovering, interested in trying new things, interested in engaging on their terms with the content at their leisure, if you will, where they can choose and not be forced into opting in and trying things. So if you're interested in the world of sampling here in the States and elsewhere, there's just a myriad, a plethora of options that happen. As I told you up front, I'm into the kind of in-home sampling opportunities, but there are an enormous number of opportunities. You can see this kind of laundry list of things that are out there. So if you've got a product that you'd like somebody to experience and try, some vendor in the marketplace can help you achieve that. At the bottom of the list, you see something about discovery commerce as an example. Birchbox, BarkBox. Last time I checked, there were over 300 different subscription boxes that existed here in the States. And what a subscription box is and what it means is folks are willing to shell out $10, $19.99, whatever it is, on a monthly basis to receive a package of items that are curated for them. Birchbox being a wonderful example of this, where they're curating beauty. They are delivering to you information about beauty on a monthly basis, and it happens to be accompanying a set of samples for you to actually try the products. But it's not a box o' samples, if you will. It is a curated beauty box. Same thing with the BarkBox. What might that be? Well, that's obviously around dogs and pets and celebrating your pets and all those kinds of things. And yes, there are samples involved in that. So you're starting to see human beings actually spend their money to be in a position to try new things because we are so curious. So this whole notion of sampling, and by the way, yes, people like stuff for free, but I think it's driven by a different motivation, particularly in the incredible blizzard of marketing stuff that we're faced with on a daily and hourly basis. It gives people a little bit of an oasis to get engaged with and try something and make their own decision about then whether they wish to go forward and buy it. When we think about sampling, we're now into talking a little bit about best practice stuff, and I'll go quickly and I'll make sure I draw the comparisons to other marketing tactics, not just sampling. But here's the checklist that we would give to somebody who's thinking about what they want to do in terms of a sampling campaign. It's about finding the right humans. It's about providing a truly good and relevant experience for those folks, making the brand stand up in its best light, and being very consistent with how that is done. And obviously, all the marketing tactics that we all are putting out into the marketplace these days, we're being held to such higher level. We've got to prove the ROI. We've got to prove it. We've got to generate really good results there. And now, much more frequently in the sampling world, we're being held to account of how am I going to help the brands expand their CRM experience. In other words, their consumer relationship marketing goals. Lots of people are using samples as a way to bring people in and be able to then engage with them and move them further down the path to falling in love with the brands. So when we talk about sampling, and again, these kinds of themes we hear when we ask about sampling, but they apply to a lot of different marketing tactics in the world. Today, people do love samples. And we talked about, I think it's about curiosity, and of course it's free. But this whole notion of adaptive marketing and being able to, in the digital space particularly, dynamically serve to the individual that comes to one's website more relevant content, and figuring out ways to make the content relevant, that becomes critical to gaining their attention. We are finally making use of the data. What Melissa was talking about, this whole notion of there's a lot more data is more precise, and we're actually finally moving from big data to actually using the data. I'm going to show you a couple examples that are pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of opportunity for much more valid and deep understanding of measurement. It's very important to have the conversation up front in a sampling program, or frankly any kind of program you're running. What is the measurement going to be, and what are the objectives, and what is going to equal success? And this whole notion of test and learn, I talked about that in the digital space in particular when I showed the logo slide. This is what we're seeing. A lot more test and learn to understand what's happening, and obviously everybody needs to spend effectively. So these are the kinds of things that are themes that are running through conversations we're having with senior management, in particular in consumer packaged goods. And here are a couple of very simple best practices in the world of sampling, but I think they have applicability to other places, particularly in the digital stream. Sample management, we'll talk about what that means in a minute. The ability to accelerate that brand's CRM effectiveness. I mentioned what I mean by that a moment ago in terms of using samples, if you will, as a portal to a relationship. New news is that there's a lot more scan-based targeting and analyzed events. What that means is the ability to use a scanner, actual register data, behavioral data, watching, buying, etc., as a way to target and also to analyze the results at the end of the day. And then a couple of things on how samples are being used in new and different ways. Sample management, it's very simple. It just means think about product sampling as a strategy, not as a tactic, if you will. In our world, the reality is product sampling represents maybe 5% or so of the total promotion spend for many brands. Again, remember my bias is consumer packaged goods. Yet it is a $2 billion plus industry here in the United States, excluding cost of product. So there's a lot of this activity going on, but it's traditionally not managed strategically. When we think about sample management, that's look at what you're doing with your product and who you're trying to reach, what kind of trial you're trying to get, how you're using the sample in multiple ways in order to engage your consumer base in new and different ways. Try to break down the silos. Don't have a program that is against retailer A and something else that corporate is doing and something else that agency of record is doing and something else that the social agency is doing. Integrate that. Very, very easy to say. Any of you in the space right now know how incredibly difficult it is to actually execute that. But nonetheless, that's the right way to think about it. And people are beginning to understand it, recognize it, and try to adapt their ability to react to it. I want to also talk about the notion of CRM and personalization. This is, I'm using sampling as the example, but for any kind of a marketing tactic that's out there, should we or should we not be, how do we think about it? John Karolewski, I'm sorry. I'm seeing questions. Do you want me to take those? Do you want to interrupt me and ask them? How would you like to do
we
that?
can take them along the way as appropriate, Larry, or we can wait to the end. It's up to you.
Well, I think we should take them along the way because people are curious. I'd like to ask them.
Okay, as it turns out, we are having thunderstorms in my location. My computer is down, although my audio is up. So while we reboot, if you want to handle the moderating,
I'll be more than happy to do that.
Okay.
We've got a question in terms of separating the impact of sampling from the impact of a good product. Sampling great for a competitively superior product, which generate great repeat. A brand with less differentiation will get lower results. So how do we separate the impact of the brand from the impact of the marketing tactic? A terrific question. The fastest way to kill a bad product is to sample it. I spend a good bit of time. I'm lucky enough to work with pretty sophisticated and savvy CPG folks. It's rare that we have a truly bad product that we're being asked to sample. That has happened in the past. I think the right answer to that is separating it. How do you separate the sampling itself from the product? Well, first do the testing of the product up front if you can. If you can't, then do these things in a test and learn scenario. Do a small-scale sampling approach, perhaps at around a single retail environment where you can read the results and see. Now, it does take some time, obviously, to read those results if you're looking for repeat, but you should test in a small, out-of-the-way place and see how people are responding to the product in terms of their purchase behavior, and that gives you an indication of whether or not the product works the way you want it to. And of all the another question, of all the sampling strategies and methods, which have you seen that has delivered the best ROI? Boy, am I tempted to say the way we do it is start sampling, but the reality is the right answer to that question is it depends. It depends on the product. For products like HBA products in particular, home cleaning products, products where the use in the home is so essential, clearly getting stuff into home generally has a higher ROI than other kinds of activities. But for instance, I'm not, in the world of sampling, we're not mailing a 22-ounce jar of spaghetti sauce. So the retailtainment kind of activities go to a Costco here in the States on a Saturday and lots of stuff is being cooked. That retailtainment is never going to go away, and there's ways to show the value and proof of that in store. So the way I actually answer this question is most of our customers are operating with a hybrid. They're using multiple tactics because finding individuals in a particular place and giving them an opportunity to try it may get you to a different set of consumers than doing something online, which gets you to a different set of consumers than doing something at an event or in store. So we try to think about it as a hybrid to try to maximize the ROI. I will tell you that we've been able to see, because we're looking at behavioral-based data, very solid impacts for samples delivered in home, because we can show that ROI. But most sampling has the ability, done right with professional sampling vendors, to pay out. It's just a question of how high is up. And you have to have very good controls in order to make that work. So that was a sort of a ducking your question, but I think the sampling industry as a whole hasn't done a great job yet of really communicating its value to the degree that we should and could. Let me then jump back into this, which is this whole notion of accelerating a brand CRM effectiveness. This is the kind of double-edged sword scenario. You use sampling. You can fill in another tactic if you'd like. It's really about personalization. That's what everybody's using the CRM data for. And so samples can provide very relevant content to someone if they engage with that sample in the appropriate place. And then you capture some data from them. That's a very fair value exchange. A consumer is very happy to give you some data in order to get a sample, particularly in an online environment. That's a very natural occurrence. At events and things like that, you can hand things out. You can ask for email addresses. You can really begin to get decent engagement. The double-edged sword part of this is now I have some good information about Sally. I'll use Sally in quotes. Challenge is that now she expects me to know that about her next time she shows up at my site or next time I engage with her. Right? As long as it's on the right side of the creepy, cool knife edge that we all live on. It's like you want her to be thankful that, well, thank you for remembering me and knowing that about me, versus having the reaction, how'd you know that about me? And I think that the e-commerce side of the world and retailers and the way in which consumers are getting far more comfortable over time with those kinds of interactions has changed consumer expectations. They expect more from us. They expect an e-commerce kind of a thing. that is in terms of the way in which we react. In our world, in sampling world, we didn't bother, and I'll use that term specifically, with sending out emails and orders confirmations and ship confirmations and such, because it was a free sample. They ordered, it's going to arrive, and we'll reach back out to them and talk to them about what they thought, and it all worked well. Now the consumer expectation is, no, I need to know, did you get my order? I need to know when you ship it, even though it's a free sample. So the expectations are changing. So the notion of how do we use the data that we capture and collect from a sampling perspective, you could, again, put in a couponing perspective or another promotional tactic. In our world, what we've begun to do is hold some of that data in a separate environment. So you've got a situation where you have data about Program 1, Program 2, Program 3, that you've done survey work on, that you've captured information, that you know about behavior, and you're trying to now have the next product that you're going to create. Let's say you're going to create something in the food world where you're trying to decide between people who prefer sour or citrus and people who prefer sweet. You've got data in the sampling world which says in Program 1, question 7 asked about your preference for lemon flavor. Program 2, question 26 asked about your preference for lime, both sour. So what you need to do is access the data, pull up the information layer that the brand objective is seeking, so that when Sally arrives at the site next in time she interacts with you, you can quickly ping an information layer, not the raw data, and be able to help and understand, should I offer her a citrus, a sour, or should I offer her sweet? That kind of holding of the data and creating information off of it, and if you're really lucky you can create some knowledge out of it, that's not machine done. Machines can manipulate data and potentially create information. You need humans to do knowledge and wisdom on top of it. So you kind of have to help the brands manage the information that you collect about whatever the marketing tactic is that you are doing. So in terms of proof and ROI, you had asked about that. Here's the new way that it's very easy, if you will, to do proof. You have the opportunity now in the marketplace to do a lot more with scan-based data, in other words, behavioral-based data. The best practice that is rapidly emerging is to either target within these pools of data that you have the access to, and or to expand, to execute the program and then kind of in retrospect read it. We think that the best practice is to go in and do scan-based targeting analytics. So target against people that you know. Here's an example. So you set a couple of campaign objectives. You go after, in this case, we're going to go and chase, we're going to re-engage lapsed subcategory buyers. This is something that the retailers generally have influence on, and they like to not deal just at brand level. They like to deal at category and subcategory level. So we went out and into scanner data. We defined a target group, as you see, and then you execute, in our case, a sampling program against a test group. You have a holdout group of control, and then you can read in the data test and control. In this case, we did it in terms of a subcategory rise of 5%, and the brand went up 18%. Interesting, you see Walmart there. Walmart Direct used to exist, Walmart Targeting, and now if you actually, those of you who are Walmart customers, you're probably hearing pretty recently about Walmart Exchange, which is a situation that they've begun to create now, which is really unprecedented scale of data, including actual purchase data melded with a lot of other data to allow you to create really efficient targeting mechanisms across multiple platforms. So they're moving omni-channel in a way that everybody has been scared about Amazon. Here comes Walmart, and it's a very interesting new approach. I won't make any comments about pricing because I haven't been involved in it yet. I'm sure it has a to it. You've got the folks at Datalogix as an example. They've got access to lots and lots of data information, and they're beginning to utilize it with us and work with brands to do lots of interesting testing like you see here. So you end up with information that looks like this at the end of the day. You can go back and see what kind of a sales lift you got, units and dollars, versus control for the actual SKUs and the brand and the category. So basically what you're starting to see come out here with this scan-based target analyzed events is you're starting to see what used to be household panel data now at scale. right? Because now you can execute it in the real world and read it. Now, for those of you who are research and data junkies like myself, you know that if we're using, and we often are, using retailer frequent shopper card data, you know that that's perfect at that retailer, but you know from a share of wallet perspective that any consumer spends a good portion of their dollars outside of that individual chain. Now you're starting to see folks like the Data Logics be able to put data together across channel, which has only been able to be done really effectively in the household panel data. It's starting, but the worst that happens is you read it in an individual channel like this as a grocery read, you know it's understated because you know some portion of that sampling happened, purchasing of that sampling program happened outside of the store. So you're starting to see this kind of information become available and being used, and classic information like source of volume. And these are kind of unassailable pieces of data. You know that this is the volume lift you got. You know that this is the trial level you got. You know this is repeat level you got because you're reading actual scan-based behavioral data. That's a new best practice. When we think about sampling, and we think about it as an overall kind of the industry and the tactic, this is the way we look at it, and you could substitute the word other promotional activity instead of sampling here. It's no longer just about the tactic. In our case, it's no longer about, stuff it in a box and mail it, printing, assembly, and fulfillment. It's about who are we trying to get at, what's the targeting strategy, what's the media, how are we going to capture the right data, how are we going to analyze it on the back end. This kind of approach is something that is becoming more and more and more important because it all impacts the overall consumer experience that a person has. All right? So you need to look above the tactic to a higher level of strategy to have the right kinds of marketing programs. 2 slides to the end. I know I'm coming to time. Here's a couple of things to think about in terms of sampling best practice that are kind of interesting and new. We've talked about B2B forever. We talked about B2C, business to business and business to consumer. There's now business to professional or business to influencers. The example that's shown there is just an opportunity to reach a very influential group of folks. These were people who are beauty technicians. They have to have a certification to shop in this particular outlet. So when it came time for the new nail colors to exist, the program was executed to people who were doing that in salons as influencers who could then carry the message of the brands forward. You can notice on that package, if you can see it, there's probably at least a dozen brands that participated reaching influencers. So business to professional is something interesting going on in the marketplace. New uses of samples, the true portal to a relationship, that discovery aspect, surprise and delight, a sample arriving in that subscription box. Samples are kind of a social meme. They're very easy to share, very easy to talk about, very easy to pick up and send to others, and very much you ought to be thinking about making that easy for consumers to do. And samples are also a mean to gain attention in different ways. People are using samples as rewards, as thank yous, all kinds of stuff, because you know what? At the end of the day, even with all this digital disruption, all this data, we're still people. We still like to try new things, and it's kind of in our basic genetics. Why did Christopher Columbus set sail, right? It's just about discovery for us. And while, brands are only one part of our lives, they're a big part of our lives, and people like to discover new things. So in this, economy of stuff assaulting us on a daily basis, to have an opportunity to try something and really consider it, people like that. But you also have to adapt to that new reality of all the data that's out there and how you might actually use that data to create new value for the consumers that you're working with. So that is the end of the prepared remarks from Mr. Burns. John, have you come back up yet?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay.
My voice is gone, but I'm up again. Thank you.
So,
we have questions?
Please. We'd love to hear some questions.
We have a couple of stragglers left here. You talked about retailers' use of their data. Can you talk more about what that means for our brand efforts?
Yes, I can. It's a good thing in the sense that retailers are beginning to use the data to try to be helpful at understanding their consumers and their consumer traffic. But it's a challenge for brands, right? Because when you go to, let's take the drug channel as a perfect example. At Walgreens, you've got Balance Rewards. At CVS, you've got Extra Care. And I'm sorry to be so U.S. Specific to those of you on the phone that aren't in this country, but can't help myself. And Rite Aid, which is another chain here, has their card, reward card. They each have their perspective. You as a brand, if you don't have some good sense of, really good sense of your consumer base, and I don't mean just from consumer insight department or the old marketing research teams in terms of behavior, if you're not beginning to amass your own data set so that you can start to have conversations with retailers that say, you want me to go after this million people, well, you know what? I have my own internal information and data. I know that there's about 250,000 of those people that are already loyal to my brand, perhaps not in your store, but I don't need to spend my precious marketing dollars in your store to go after the set of people that you are telling me you'd like to reach because they're already loyal to me. Follow? So this is kind of that Venn diagram overlap. That's cutting edge stuff that's just starting to take place where people are starting to use their internal databases and take a look at how those match and mesh with retailers. My expectation is that retailer data cost, if you will, the cost to access, will begin to come down as retailers begin to recognize the incredible value that brands can and do bring in analytics and use of information and data. Right now there's still too much of a contentious atmosphere between retailers and brands, even though we're getting much better at partnership. You really need to get to a true partnership to utilize the data for the benefit of both of you. For the time being, you're buying.
Okay, final question. How can we deal with freebie hunters? I think you call them freebie hounds, Larry.
I call them the bane of my existence. What's interesting about them, and we've done a lot of work over a long time. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this, there's let's call it a subcategory of people that for whom samples on the web is kind of a sport, and they hunt for it, and they get a lot of social value and halo when they are the first to post that something's available. And they're generally not necessarily desirable and in the target. I'll tell you that there's a whole lot of things that Start Sampling as a company has done for what we refer to as access controls. Things like, I hope nobody on the phone call is a freebie hound or freebie hunter, things like making it impossible for certain URLs to access registration pages. Or if I have a person coming from a source, you can read the source that they're coming from in URLs, etc. If I read the source as a known freebie site, I might actually, don't tell anyone, I might actually say the samples are all gone, because then what will happen is they'll post back on the board that they posted on, great sample, they're gone, and that'll shut down the activity from that board. We also do things like specifically only allow into the site those folks who have been reached by known media that we wished to do. What we're really talking about is viral spread of information about sampling. I will tell you that if you are doing a sampling program in the States and you're north of 250, 300,000 samples that you're looking to distribute, you're going to need media in order to distribute them. The challenge is if you've got a very small set of samples that you really want to target, you need to put the work in up front to clarify the objectives and put in place protections, if you will. Not because there's some evil intent on the part of these folks. A lot of them are just, trying to find things. You have to recognize it's there and deal with it. And as I say, we've been doing it for a long time now and know the tricks. And frankly, if I could blacklist about 120,000 households, that's all it is, kind of a fringe group, I would, but the lawyers won't let us. So we have an idea of who's out there and how to control it.
Okay. Well, we're moving on now to ending this session off with our pop quiz. Based on the presentation you just heard, the first person to type in the correct answer in the chat box will receive a copy of the book, The Essentials of Shopper Technology. Type in only the letter of the correct answer. And here is the question. Okay, and we have a winner already.
Look at that.
The answer is B, 154 billion. And the right person here is Rick Shea. Rick Shea. The book will be on its way to you right after the conference. Thank you, Larry. That was great. I learned an awful lot about sampling.
More than you wanted to, John. Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Okay. Our next program will begin in 5 minutes. The topic will be the future of shopping. Until then, this is John Karolewski signing off for Start Sampling, CPG Matters, and the Shopper Technology Institute.